and hopefully we'll get the rest of the students hopping on soon. The classes switch between online and in person, so
Oh, wow.
sometimes it takes a while for them to get logged in. But happy Monday, everybody. I am very excited for our guest speaker today. It is Stephanie Riel of Real Deal Marketing. And if nothing else that she teaches, you have a last name that you can translate into a company somehow that works, because one of the best brand names I think I've ever seen. But yeah, they might be in the classroom one. They didn't read their emails. Hopefully they'll log on soon from there. But Stephanie is created and owner of her marketing company, Real Deal Marketing, and as such works with employees, has organized a business, also deals with contractors, and has I believe, a lot of insight on how to manage a business. And part of her work with businesses is helping them manage a lot of their processes, because you'll realize that managing a business isn't simply just the manager of the business doing schedules and payroll and the obvious things. But when you talk about managing a business, there's so much more tied into that. And I am going to ask her a bunch of questions, and I'm going to let her kind of share some of her experiences with you all, so that you get a better idea of, outside the textbook, outside the classroom, how does real life work of being a manager and being in charge of things. And we're probably going to use the Super Bowl and the commercials from yesterday with some hypotheticals to see how she would answer it, and again give you guys some insight into that, because there were some things in the commercials that people liked, some things they didn't like, so we could always use that as a tool. So before we get too deep into it, Stephanie, is there anything I missed in talking about you and your background that you'd like to share with?
I think that's a lovely summary. Just thanks for having me. The only other thing that I would maybe note is I actually started my business when I was in college. I was a senior at Arizona State, and I graduated, or was near graduation, at a time where, you know, the job market looked very different, and I had a lot of journalism and writing and communications experience, but kind of came in contact with marketing and realized that was the perfect mix of all these different pieces and areas and tools that I was interested in. And so I started a business so I could get real world experience and leverage that to start a career.
Well, fantastic. When you think about managing your business, the marketing company, what comes to you as maybe like the 2 or 3 most important responsibilities you have in managing your company?
Whenever I'm thinking of that management piece, especially now that I have a team, obviously when I first started over 10 years ago, it was just me. But now that I have a team, that duty and that responsibility to make sure that they are receiving payment for the work that they're doing, and that duty and responsibility for any of the bills that we have that we're paying as the business, that always is such a responsibility that I really take to heart. And so that's definitely that first piece, that invoicing and payment processing, you know, making sure that our clients are paying us so that we can pay any of our contractors or any of our tool or service providers, those different pieces. You know, I think the other piece that really I've been learning is the accounting and the finance side of it, with all the different, you know, processes and forms. There's a couple of different tools that I've tested and used over the years for the business, but you really wear a lot of hats when you're a business owner and when you're managing a team. So finding different tools and technology pieces that can help you is absolutely an amazing thing to do, but you have to find the one that works for your business. So there's a little bit of trial and error there. So like accounting software like QuickBooks, or I've used FreshBooks in the past, but that definitely, having that piece of the house and that piece of the business in order makes everything else run really smoothly, because if we don't pay our contractors, they might stop work, or we won't have access to a tool if we don't continue to pay for it. So making sure that those pieces and all the different pieces that go along with that are in place.
And are there certain things in the same way, me as a business owner, I know my marketing skills are limited. I reach out to someone like you to say, this is your specialty. Are there things as a small business owner in marketing where you sit there and say, I could do this, but the time and effort I'm gonna take, and I may not do it well? I mean, because I look at that as kind of like a big thing in managing, knowing what you can't do and knowing that it's worth hiring somebody else too, for certain.
That delegation piece is probably the number one skill that anyone who's managing a team or managing a business, because there are so many similarities there, that would probably be the first step and the first skill that I would say you have to know.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, especially as on the small business side, you already wear so many hats. You're trying to do so many different pieces. If there's a piece that maybe is really it takes you so much longer than it could just to outsource it to someone, or you don't enjoy it as much, maybe there's another way that you could delegate that to another team member who does a really great job, who has some joy and fulfillment out of it, and that they can take that off your plate. That is of utmost importance, so you can keep your sanity.
Yeah.
But also keep delivering that quality of work that you really want to.
No, that's very true. And with COVID and the way this last year is going, you said something about making sure you've got money to pay your employees. It's disheartening, sad. I mean, to watch so many companies this past year, and you have owners who haven't taken paychecks for months because they're trying to do the right thing by their employees and whatnot, and businesses end up closing because of that. It's just that feeling of responsibility. I mean, that's got to weigh on you sometimes, where you're sitting there saying, I've got to make sure I've got this covered before I worry about my own stuff.
Absolutely. I think that I think seeing that just in all that's happened in all the different businesses that are struggling, you see that firsthand. But definitely that's something that weighs on you. And I think that even if you're managing a team, making sure that your team's being treated appropriately and fairly, that's always been something as I have managed teams, whether it's my own team for my own company now, or when I worked for other companies and was managing teams. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and just trying to treat others the way that you would want to be treated. That's how I always like to operate. But absolutely, I think kind of one of the things I remember talking to a client early on at the beginning of COVID and all the shutdowns beginning of last year, kind of probably around this time. She's actually based on the East Coast in Delaware, and she was definitely concerned how she was going to make it work. She had a brick and mortar store and a storefront, an office space, and was concerned how she was going to continue to offer her services to the public, but to be able to also take care of her employees in a meaningful way. And I think it became really quickly obvious to us both how important it is to have some budget, some runway, some savings, so that if that situation does happen, that you at least have something to pull from if that money isn't coming in the way that it was before. Yeah,
no, that's a good point. Planning years ago used to be, what's your 3-year plan, your 5-year plan, and managers are supposed to look super long term and make these crazy goals. That's not today's world anymore, is it?
No, I think that it helps to have kind of a general vision, maybe like a thought of where you want to be at that point. But I think what I have seen so many times, I mean, this is even just in life, right? We make plans, or we have an idea, by this age, or by this month, I'm gonna accomplish this. And It's great to have those actionable goals, but I think the mindset of thinking of them as a goal and something to strive for versus, if it doesn't happen, it just crushes and ruins you, and you just can't move on, because life happens. And that was the case before COVID, but I think even now, it's really hard to plan those goals and to know exactly what the next 30, 60, 90, 120 days are going to look like to even think about those next steps. But having some guiding principles and kind of that overall idea of what you would like that next 3, 5, or 10 years to look like definitely can help make sure that you're making those decisions along the way that are going to support that overall goal, even if you have to change course and focus on a couple of different things along the way.
And I mean, but I think that's the big thing is that magic word everyone's used to beat to death this past year, being able to pivot. I mean,
Yeah,
that and I can't think what the other word is. This is that they killed, but I mean, the idea is, especially small businesses, and those are the ones that are being successful, like your company that you were talking about, that has kind of said, this is where the market's going. And I don't want to just focus on COVID changes, because I think it was coming to this before COVID also, that businesses had to be willing to try that audacious thing, but also realize they might have to go somewhere different if it isn't working. And
absolutely.
I mean, like your business, you can say, I want to do X, Y, Z and set that as a goal, but realize that you may have to go a different path if it doesn't work, or if there's some reason it's not a good fit for you. And it might be financially successful, but you still want to change away from it, which can be tough, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to make those decisions along the way, but I think a lot of times a lot of the things that you're sharing and explaining right now remind me so much of that experience that we have with failure, and sometimes thinking that it's a negative thing, or oh no, I can't try this, it won't be successful. But I don't look at failure that way. I really look at it as an opportunity to learn. And even if it didn't work, hey, I tried it, here's what I learned from it instead, and then using that to make my next decision moving forward. I don't really let those missteps or areas where I have changed direction hold me back.
And that's, I mean, working for yourself or working for someone else, that's a great thing, because if you can sit there and say to somebody, I'm going to take chances, I'm going to try things that are responsible, but if it doesn't work, I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. I mean, that's a huge selling point to, if it's an investor in your business or your boss, I mean, along the same lines. And how do you use that to present yourself in a better light, instead of it's like, oh, weren't you the one that tried this and it was a huge bomb?
Yeah.
So
Even just that approach to failure in my business with my contractors, they're allowed, they have that freedom, and that there's that trust between us that they're allowed to try different things, and it might not work all the time, and that's okay. Letting it be okay.
yeah.
Not everybody has that perspective, but when you do, it really opens up a whole different avenue for us.
All right, now this is a sensitive one because we're in school, but where would you rank the differences of good managers based on, here's someone with all the educational credentials they could have versus that person who's lived it and experienced it? Is it one or the other, or is there a balance? And you're okay to say anything.
I think that for me, in all things in life, I often find that it's a mix of both instead of one or the other. But I might be a little biased because I'm mostly self-taught. To have that, I know for me, it was always really valuable to learn it as I was going versus learning it from a book. I was a good student, and I definitely did what I had to do, but I always got more out of it, and really feel like I learned a lot more from doing it on my own or from watching others doing it. Different internships, different entrepreneurs that I had exposure to in my life and growing up. I mean, what an amazing tool now. We have social media. You can see the way that different entrepreneurs run their businesses, run their lives, and kind of experience what that looks like. And I think that kind of an education and those kind of positive influences sometimes can teach us more than a book or a video or those different pieces can.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because a lot of people get really bogged down, and this isn't necessarily a management thing, but just more a real life thing, where you're applying for a job and it says these are the required elements that they want. This certain education or this certain experience or whatever. And people are like, well, I don't have that exact piece, so I'm not even going to try. And that doesn't work. I mean, you should, if you want the job, still try for the job. If you can sell what
Absolutely.
you've done as a substitute for what they think they're looking for, hiring people like that, they appreciate that, right? I mean, when you hire people, you're not going to automatically slap someone away because they don't fit into that box you think you're looking
100%. I think more often than not, that box that you originally think that you're looking for, like that job description you put together and that example, it ends up not necessarily being what you really need the most after all. I mean, I can think of so many jobs that I applied for over the years that I was definitely not probably as qualified on paper,
for.
based on, the number of years of experience they were looking for, the number of credentials that they wanted, all those different pieces. But I still threw my hat in the ring and I write a very convincing cover letter. So I oftentimes I would at least get a first interview or at least a call with that first step, whatever that was, and then I could decide for myself kind of how it felt to me. But
Yeah, we later in the semester do some cover letter resume stuff, and a friend of mine who was a lawyer, she actually wrote a cover letter to a company. She wanted to get out of the practice of law as to why they should create a job for her, what the job should be titled, how much it should pay her, and she got the job. And it was like,
yeah,
you've got to do these things. And it's the same way in management. I mean, if you're looking to contract with a company and they say, we want someone that's a national company or has offices in multiple cities or states, and you're just based here, you still say, I can handle this job and apply for it.
absolutely.
Yeah. That's just important, understanding the confidence you can have in yourself in doing things. And what about as a manager, you have to deal with like interpersonal relationships of your employees, your clients. Do you have any examples of like bad things that happened or any kind of I shouldn't say fun stories, but memorable stories of like, wow, I didn't expect that to be the result.
Tons. I mean, both from working for someone, and being on a team and or managing teams from as an employee on a team to even, within the business that I own, operate, and manage today. I think especially when you have other people involved. When I remember when I was first hiring and really first kind of taking that delegating and bringing someone on board, uh, it was really hard for me to do that at first as the manager and the business owner, because I was so convinced that the process and the way that uh, we had established that we wanted to do things was the ideal way to do it. And having that openness and that understanding that everyone's going to have a little bit of their own personality and their own kind of approach to what it might say on a paper of a step by step, and letting that just help find the best way and kind of group think it instead of it just being one way or the other. But definitely, I mean, especially in my business, we have a lot of different deadlines where we'll have a campaign that's launching at the beginning of March, and we have to have creative and content and all those different pieces and assets to the client, by this week, to be able to give the client enough time to review the documents and the different creative and all the different pieces, and then to give their feedback and do any revisions or edits that we can then wrap that all up before that campaign starts in March. And there have been quite a few times where, maybe I thought on my end, I remember one specific time that we were launching a campaign, and this was a couple of years ago, but I thought that the directions were really clear of what we were looking for, and the creative and the content came back from the contractor. It totally missed the mark. We were already behind schedule by a day, And that was an opportunity and a lesson for me to really make sure that that was communicated well enough, and to figure out where the confusion was so I could improve. But then also I had to have a conversation with the client and say, hey, we were supposed to get this to you on Tuesday. We're not going to get it till you on Friday now. um Here's why. Totally. And I feel that being transparent in that piece, that just feels right for me. And so, being able to take ownership of that and manage the process is best, so that I can best manage the expectation of the client when maybe something's not going to be to them on a day they were expecting it.
No, that makes great sense. And when we talk about interpersonal like roles with management, also small businesses, especially, there's lots of times where um, it's almost where we have friends become friends with people that work with us, and that that designation between the you're my employee from 9 to 5 and you can be my friend from 5 to 9. How do you separate that? Because if you're working closely with just one or two people, it's hard not to become friends.
It definitely is challenging, but there is I think a lot of value to that, and kind of having those separations that, um, almost like a compartmentalization of, okay, here's our work relationship, here's our friend relationship. I actually have a couple of clients that I have become friends with. We've worked together for years. And I think one of the main things that's really helped us kind of maintain that professional and that personal relationship is setting really clear boundaries. So, for example, this specific client I'm thinking of, we've been working together for 2.5 years. We've become friends, and we're also in the middle of contract renegotiations right now. So that's just business. We're on our end, we're looking to get, paid more, to expand our scope, to do more services for them. And they have to make sure that it makes sense for the business on their end too. But in the next couple of days, we're jumping on a call just as friends. It was like, hey, I would really love to hear what's going on with life and how you're doing. Let's just have a friend talk, not a work talk. And on that conversation, we will just kind of catch up and have, be friendly and not talk shop or business at all. But having those clear boundaries kind of from the start, I think really is really important. And it comes in with managing a team too. It's great to be friendly with a team, but sometimes that management element, at least in my experience, when you are working with a team and you become too friendly or too close and you don't have those clear boundaries, it really affects both sides of the relationship, both, how you're showing up on the work and on the professional side, as well as kind of it can affect the personal relationship too.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I once sold part of my son's season tickets to an employee, and the people who sat around me knew that it was an employee of mine, and it was like all of a sudden I'm getting these phone calls and texts. You know what your person is doing, at the game. I'm like, oh shoot,
Yeah,
that's a
I
whole
think
different level.
it absolutely is. But I think especially we even see that digitally with social media now as well. If someone identifies themselves as a employee of a company and they say something and it goes viral for all the wrong reasons, and it's a real big PR problem for a brand too. So definitely, I always say, and when working with clients that have teams, we always talk about how your employees are kind of your first brand ambassadors. That's your first line of that brand ambassador for the business, because somebody's going to know that they work for your company, and how they show up really reflects on you and the company too, even if it's indirectly. Um, but I think that we see a lot of those kind of hiring or managerial challenges with maybe just not a right cultural fit, those different pieces really being cleared up. If the business doesn't already have really clear values and what they stand for and what's important to them first, then once developing those, hiring based on those and that cultural fit, it really ends up making sure that people, and not that you have to be 100% in line with it, but that there's at least that connection to the business for the right reasons, and then being able to kind of grow the relationship from there as a part of the team. Because a company really is, in a lot of ways, especially a small business, it can be very familial feeling, where it's you spend a lot of time together when you're working. So being able to make sure it's right, that right cultural fit can help sometimes with that.
Sure. All right. Juan, I'm sorry, I missed your chat. You typed that in a couple minutes ago. It appears to me that there is a lot of confidence involved in this. And I skipped over what this was. What were you?
Oh, she was talking about, making or how would I say it, when she was taking losses in companies or making decisions that to learn from, and a lot of that times it seems like you'd have to have the confidence to make that kind of decision.
Yeah, it's a good point. Stephanie, you want to talk a little bit about like just the ability to get over some of these bad things and feeling sure enough of your business to go forward?
Absolutely. I think there is confidence involved, but I don't think anyone is ever 100% confident all the time. I think that there's some of the decisions that you make, sometimes you sit with them a while, you think about it, and you might even look back and think, hey, did I really make the right decision there? But I think kind of for some of those tougher decisions, where I have really found that confidence really comes in is after, the first time we do anything, the first time you ride a bike, even as you're just learning, it's hard. And that's the same thing with managing a team or managing a business. It's hard at first, and there's a little bit of a learning curve, but I think a lot of times that confidence, we can build it ourselves when we have that experience along the way too, because we know how we handled it the last time. We can remember, I did this, it didn't work that well, maybe I'll try this time. And so that confidence kind of builds on its own too, even if it isn't already there to begin with.
And it's great to, I mean, successful managers have support networks, and not only just for helping to get the job done, but almost like as cheerleaders. And you got to have that. I mean, it's in my mind kind of as necessary as the support people that help you do the job.
Absolutely. I think that especially as you're starting out, I know I find so much value in connecting with other business owners and just even saying, hey, I'm really struggling with this. How have you handled it? Because even though I started my business 10 years ago, I've only been running the business full time for 2 years. And I've had the ability to connect with some business owners that have been in business full time for many years. And so really seeking that support and guidance almost as a mentorship, and really building that community and asking questions and then making that decision based on all those different information points.
And to that level, I mean, it's something where when you get that, you're dying to turn around and give it too.
Yeah.
And that's something like more of a public service announcement kind of thing that I want all the students to understand. You may be hesitant to ask for help, but pretty much everyone's gotten help, and they're dying to turn around and pay that forward to somebody else.
Yeah.
It's got to fit into your schedule and all that, and don't be over demanding. But whenever you ask, usually if you're respectful about it, you're always going to get yeses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, and that's also one, that's something that I've just recently learned in the last couple of years, that asking for help piece, it's tough because you don't want to seem like you don't know what you're doing, but none of us really know what we're doing. And I know that there's a lot of memes that say that, but it's the truth. We're all just trying to figure this thing called life out. And I think that goes along with business and management too. It's definitely okay to ask for help or input.
And two, it's also funny, like, I mean, people get afraid, like, I won't ask my competitor or who I perceive to be my competitor, because why would they help me? We're competitors. And it's like, in this kind of, you can look at it as sports rivals. I mean, the city of Phoenix always looks at LA as their big rivals. LA never thinks of Phoenix as their main rival in anything. So it's like if Phoenix called LA and said, hey, should we make this trade or do this? LA would be like, yeah, here's our advice. Because they don't look at Phoenix as competition. But businesses are the same way, and managers are the same way. And you got to get it out of your head that they won't help and expecting that now. So let's talk some hypotheticals from like yesterday's Super Bowl, and it's just because it's always a fun Monday topic for me because it's there after Super Bowl. But the commercials are usually decent, whatever. But this year, everyone went on to pretty much a diversity, we want to be positive kind of messaging. Jeeps, for instance, was the whole let's come back together as a country. Let's imagine you own a Jeep dealership here, you're the manager of a Jeep dealership. There were people on the far right political, far left, both equally upset about how dare Jeep say we should forgive, forget, move forward. How do you deal with that if you're the manager who has to walk in Monday morning and start answering phone calls and dealing with upset customers because of a commercial?
I think especially with that example where, Jeep that's the national brand. They're not necessarily, they supply the cars and they have
Right.
different rules and regulations for the local dealerships, but they're not on the front lines
Yeah.
necessarily, so to speak. But I think the thing that I learned this in one of my college courses actually about the rule of thirds, how there's a third of people that are always going to love you no matter what. There's a third of people that are, always going to hate you no matter what. And then there's that third in the middle, and really wanting to focus on that third and, trying to convince them of who you are.
Yeah.
Based on, that was in 2009 that learning came about. I really think when we're looking at 2021 version of that, it's pretty close to 50-50, where half are going to love you, half are going to hate you, and there's not really that much in the middle anymore. But I think that's where that company and even that local team that's on the ground, here down the street at that local dealership, they know what the values of that brand are and maybe why that message was the message for that business and that brand on a national level, and really just emulating that in their experience with their customer or with their team, whoever it might be that they're interacting with, and really just trying to make it that they have the best experience with that brand as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting because the visceral reactions to some of these commercials is amazing, and they are all national brands, like you said, but people here go over after the people they can reach and go after, which are the local representatives of the business, and it takes a lot to just kind of not throw up your hands and you're like, what the F, are you serious about this? But it's important that you got to kind of learn how to deal with it. It's not really human relations, but it's just that the whole human interaction of that and accommodating it. And it might not be Super Bowl commercials, but it might be something else that happens within your business, and that ability to diffuse situations is tough as a manager. Are there any,
I think kind of, sorry to jump in, but I
Oh,
think
no.
for that specifically, a lot of times when people reach out with feedback and maybe it's not the most friendly or positive of feedback, a lot of times people just want to be heard. I've worked on the front lines of national brand social media accounts responding and doing customer service on social before. And one specific was a national home builder. And, they made thousands of homes a year. And, maybe 1% would have an issue, but when you're making that many homes, that's a couple hundred people. And they'd, of course, all go on the Facebook page complaining about how their toilet was broken, or there was an issue with the roof, or whatever that might be. And, I think one of the things that I found through that experience, even though it wasn't a direct managerial experience, we were behind the keyboard, but a lot of times people just want to be heard and know that somebody's listening. And so I think kind of that first step, whether it's that example or if you're managing a team, is really sincerely listening and saying, I hear you, and let's find a way to work through this together.
Yeah, and I think Southwest Airlines is actually one of the best companies at doing that, because people get stuck on the runway. First thing they do is they turn the phone back on and tweet, "I'm sitting on the runway." And it's, we know the plane's late, but they're nice about it, and it's interesting because management skills are you sit there and you always think, I'm managing a business I own, I manage a business where the business made me the manager. But as a customer service representative, I mean, you're managing your swath of clients and customers that come into you in the same breath. So it's like everybody manages somebody. And you have to remember that, and you have to think about all these tools you have, and listening is such a integral part of that, because if you don't know what the problem is, you can't fix the problem. And sadly, no one ever comes into a business and just starts yelling shouts of praise. They don't ever do that.
In all my years, I've not seen that happen.
No, it's the same like thing with Yelp. I'm not going to be late on Wednesday. Yeah, how to diffuse or address issues is huge, Juan. And it's one of those skills where you know when you've called someplace and you have a problem, whether or not you're dealing with someone who has those skills or doesn't, because it becomes very evident very quick if you're going to have a nice conversation, productive, or if it's going to turn into a bloodbath.
Yeah.
But it's important. And asking for managers sometimes helps, but I mean, usually you want to be the person that's able to handle that as the entry level person.
Yeah.
Other thing tied to the Super Bowl in a sense, which is kind of unique. In Tampa, they, home team had the Super Bowl, won it, all that. There are people now, like say, and I have a tie to a couple of the bars there, that boycott this bar, boycott this restaurant, because they allow people to celebrate with no mask, no social distancing. And again, the owner's got to come out and make a statement. When your business is kind of being thrown under the bus by people that don't understand what the whole experience is, how important is it as a manager to get out in front of potential problems?
I think we see time and time again how important it is to be proactive. I think it is so tough though, and with this specific situation, I think the one thing that we've experienced is, I mean, I don't have a business necessarily where somebody's coming into my storefront and, dining in or anything like that. But I think the rules for those kind of establishments across the country, I mean, I know for sure here in Arizona, they've changed so much. It's kind of hard to keep up.
Yeah.
And so I think as a manager, that puts you in a really difficult position of how do you have the most up-to-date information, but providing that, from the ownership or whatever that next level up is, having that education on what the protocol is, why you're doing what you're doing, having that education piece that then can empower that manager to have that right answer, or to be able to at least explain what's going on. Because I think a lot of times people get frustrated because they don't understand or they're confused, especially with this specific example, because every state is so different right now too.
Yeah, no, that's a big thing. And I think like the other thing with it though is like, sometimes an employee will come to you and say, I think I might have screwed this up. And do you kind of cross your fingers and say, hopefully the customer doesn't find out? Or do you go tell the customer, hey, it's going to take me a couple days, I'm going to fix this because such and such happened, and run the risk of them being upset?
I think having that proactive approach is always the best route and always the best way to go, even if you don't know the answer right then. Like you said, like, hey, it might take us a couple days, but here's what happened. We're going to do something about it. Let me get back to you. Because I think the opposite of that, where you don't say anything and you just hope that the customer doesn't find out, when they do find out, it ends up looking worse after the fact, because it feels like you're hiding something, you're not transparent, you lose that trust. And when you lose trust from a customer, or once it, if it would get out, then a potential customer, that direct impact is a lot worse than it would be if you would have just addressed it head on to begin with.
Yeah. And that goes back to kind of the TV commercial thing where you do that to somebody, all of a sudden they're standing on a rooftop shouting how horrible you are versus how great you are. So
Yeah.
yeah, it just some of the things that happen to managers always it it saddens me the way they're abused, but the ones that stand up for it, I always kind of have this smile of pride when I watch people deal with difficult issues and succeed at it. So
Absolutely.
you see too many of them though. How do you balance the world of work life and as a manager? I mean, because you could probably work 22 hours a day and not get everything done.
Absolutely. I think that the first piece is knowing that it's always a kind of a sliding scale and a balancing act. There's never going to be one day where you always have it all 100% balanced and figured out. But it's a lot of it is prioritization first. You know, what needs my attention the most right now? What's on fire, so to speak, of what needs to be addressed right this minute, what's something that can wait a little bit, and then making that list from there, because we're all human. You can only do so much. But really being okay with it, you not getting maybe every single thing on that list for the whole week done in that one day, because that's not really feasible or realistic.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you had to say, I waste your time, I guess is the best way. What are the things where you sit back at the end of the day going, God, if I didn't have to deal with this, I could have accomplished so much more?
Emails. It's the first and foremost. I think a lot of those different tasks, I like the email and those different pieces, those technology tools that are in place, of course, to help us communicate, but sometimes they make it 10 times harder. My team is fully remote, so I'm here in Arizona. I have an employee that's in Georgia, an employee that's in Minnesota, and then I have clients all over the country. Florida, Delaware, California, Texas. I probably am not even thinking of all of them. But very few of them are here. And so I think that, there's so many different tools, and we can't have our attention everywhere all the time. I mean, it's just impossible. So having a set kind of balance of how you want to communicate with those, maybe if it's a manager and it's your team, letting them know the best way to get in touch with you. If it's an emergency, it's urgent, you need me to see it, maybe you don't email me right away. Maybe you text me, or maybe there's a chat app or something that you're using to directly communicate in a quicker fashion, only because some of those other pieces, like that email piece, they can really take up so much time. One of the tools, actually, how I know that email was sent so quickly, my answer is we track our time. So any single piece of my day that I work on for the business, I'm tracking it. And then you can look and see over time how much time you're spending on email, how much time you're spending on a different project or a part of a project or phone meetings, things like that. And so being able to kind of have a good visibility on that, and then you can either look at different ways to make it more efficient, or a workaround for different systems and processes, so it doesn't maybe get lost in email and you don't see it for a couple of days if it's urgent or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting because I've seen workplaces where there's numbers of people, like you said, and especially outside of the same, where it's virtual, where there's a time where they kind of agree to send all of each other's emails and information and updates to say between 10 and 11 a.m. we're going to do our email swaps for the day, so that's, instead of sitting in a meeting, it's like, here's all the stuff I need to share with you, so you have it, and it's all kind of time stamped at the same thing. But I found out that there was a tracking device on emails the worst way possible when I was a lawyer. So I opened an email and I said, I'll deal with this later. And 2 hours later, someone calls me and was like, why didn't you respond to my email? I'm like, I haven't gotten to you. Well, I know you opened it 2 hours ago. And that things like that are tools that were set up to be good, but it's like, it kills your management ability to kind of say, I'm going to prioritize when other people have these tools to know what you're doing in the technology world.
We use tracking too, so I know when my clients open emails, but I don't call them out on it if they don't read it. I think there's a nicer way to communicate that. I mean, even for contractors, right? We'll send something. We use a project management tool called Asana for a lot of our tasks, so that I don't have that visibility on maybe when they've exactly seen the task. But we have different processes in place for how we interact in that platform, so that we are communicating, and I do know, maybe when they've seen something.
Yeah.
But the art of the follow-up, like, hey, have you seen this yet, or have you checked this out? I think that can really be a helpful tool. I mean, I know, just like you kind of just shared with their example, there's a lot of times I'll read an email and I know I can't deal with it right then, so I have a process for how I go back and look at it later. If somebody's tracking it, they're going to see that I opened it, but I haven't responded yet. And I think that a lot of us do that now, because we do get so many emails in a day, and there's so many different ways to communicate, that, all the notifications to go through it, that can take up your whole day just answering notifications on different channels or things like that.
Yeah.
But definitely the art of the follow-up of, hey, have you seen this yet? Or, just wanted to follow up on this. I haven't heard back from you. And then having an expectation of what that process is, if something's really urgent or needs addressed sooner than, say, the next business day or whatnot.
And telephone calls have basically gone away, haven't they? I mean, it's like no one talks on the phone anymore.
I talk to clients. There's a couple of clients that I talk to pretty regularly on the phone, or on Zoom. But I would say overall, it's becoming less and less of a tool. I think that there's, like, I'm in my early 30s. I don't necessarily love talking on the phone. I would rather email or text it. I just feel like phone calls take a lot of time a lot of the times. And a lot of times, like, if you ever worked in an office or maybe at a restaurant, really anywhere, and you have that meeting, sometimes when you're in like an office environment, sometimes it feels like there's just meetings just to meet, like you're not really doing anything other than just meeting.
Yeah.
And so I think that being able to prioritize and knowing, oh, this is a conversation we probably need to have on a phone call. This is something we can handle on an email, or hey, this could be a text, or we also use a tool called Slack. And this could be a quick Slack that I send to my client instead. I don't need to jump on a phone call to tell them, this update. And I think you can look at that the same way for managing, depending on what communication tools you would have for a team too, of knowing what that priority is and what those different tools are.
Yeah. And I also look at it as like a management skill as far as follow-up and accountability, especially with employees or even customers and clients. In a phone call, it's all verbal and it's out there. Whereas even like Zoom, you might be recording it. Email and text messages are great because the words are on paper saying this is what I expect from you. So that, I think, leads to a lot more productive time than, because if you have one phone call and then there's confusion, that person's probably going to call you back instead of changing methods of communication. And
yes. I actually had this struggle with a client a while ago. She needed to always get on a phone call, but then didn't remember what was spoken about. So it ended up being a phone call and a phone call and a phone call. Even though, I think the one thing for meetings as that manager is kind of understanding what that other person needs and how they really benefit to be communicated with.
Yeah.
So we send basically call recaps via email with bullet points of what we discussed and kind of different action items for both our team and for the client after any of those phone calls or meetings. Because even if you're taking notes, you might not remember every single thing. And so those have really helped us really keep all the priorities straight. And that's definitely a way that email can be very useful. Also, like you were saying, a lot of times in our business, we need approval from a client before we can start a marketing campaign. They have to sign off on the creative and the content and all those different pieces. We have to have a written trail of record for that. So we need to use email for that. only because my lawyers have told us that text messaging isn't as enforceable. So, you know, I have a couple of clients that they do text us, and I'm like, I appreciate that, but I'm still gonna have to email you for you to give that sign off before we can send it, only because we legally need that paper trail, so to speak. So
No, that makes sense. And with that follow-up, I think it's the understanding of communication is just the other aspect of it, where you may say, I'll do this, this, and this. They don't get what that is, and they think it's more or less, or it's gonna cost them less. The laying it out on paper seems so much more efficient and legally reliable, is a good way to put it. When and this is exactly what your business is kind of set up to do. You set up corporate strategies on social media for people. I mean, you say this is how you should present yourself to the world. They fill out a survey. I know that because I did, and you give great advice. What are some of the most important things for businesses if someone's starting a new business or finally decided to launch? I'm going to get into the 21st century and beyond social media. What do they have to think about?
I think first and foremost, whenever we're working with a new business, we really start with the brand as a whole. We want to know who they're talking to, who their target audience is, because you have to know, even if you're managing a team, knowing who that person is that you're talking to, because that's how you can really make sure that it's relatable, that content is, and that's the same thing on the marketing side as well. So we do a lot of different question answer sessions, questionnaires, those different pieces to really help understand the business, but then really even more so understanding the target audience and really looking at the business data of what it's telling us versus you know, maybe who they think their audience is. We want to know who's coming to the website actually, who's you know, what's the analytics behind their social media channels, who's actually interacting with their brand on social media if they already have a brand established, or, you know, based on market research, who that target audience is, and then crafting the message to that target audience. So everything is really customer centric and data driven. But when we're talking about that data, we're looking at the actual business data or industry or market data, and then really looking at who that audience that we're, you know, who's that business trying to sell to? What are they looking to accomplish? What is that person interested in? You know, getting to have a little bit of fun with that part, because the data only tells us so much, but really being able to build and go from there as a jumping off point. And so that's kind of that first piece, no matter what. And then once we understand that, we can make specific recommendations on a channel, say Instagram or Facebook, or, you know, maybe they should be doing, you know, paid advertising. And so we really can kind of dig into those details once we know who that target audience is.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I mean, we got to be able to give you all that info, but also, like, I mean, the idea with creating this strategy, businesses have to, the managers and the business owners of the business have to start thinking about what's the purpose. I mean, am I creating a website to share my company? Is it a website or a present that's functional that says, here, buy my stuff at this? Or is it a website or social media that says, I'm better than everyone else who's doing this? And a lot of businesses don't understand, I don't think, and maybe you can speak more to this, that there's got to be a focus as to what you're creating, and then deciding how to maximize that. Same way in person, we can't do everything well. Online, you can't do everything. You have to do one thing and do it well, at least to start.
Yeah, and it might not make sense to do everything online as a business.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know, depending if you're trying to target, say you're trying to target moms who are 38 to 42, you'll probably want to use Instagram more than you would Facebook. unless you already have some brand ambassadors lined up, and then you could leverage Facebook too, because of just how the nature of the channels are. But so I think kind of not having that focus, or that, oh my gosh, we have to be doing all of the things, because everything doesn't make sense for every business. And I think the same thing when you're managing everything, doing all of the things doesn't make sense for every team member that you're managing either.
Yeah, no, I think it's it. It's just it's an interesting dynamic watching some businesses squander because they're not sure. If you focus 10% of your energy on 10 different things, it's going to show, versus 50% on 2 different things. You really do 2 things well. Back to kind of, and I'm skipping back and forth a little bit, managing a business. You created your business. Did you create a mission statement as far as what?
It's so funny you say that. I have not, actually. I don't even follow my own advice. I'm actually, so my business turns 11 this year. Well, what is Real Deal Marketing now, I guess, turns 10 this year. But my LLC and all of that piece, that I've been consulting and kind of doing freelance work for 11 years. One of the first things that I take my clients through is that mission statement, vision. We got to know who we are and who we're talking to. And I know who I'm talking to, but I've not done that other part for myself. So I'm actually working on that process right now. So I will have that process complete in like the next week or so, for the first time.
We'll have to go on the website and look for it.
Yeah.
What do you recommend to, or do you like suggest, hey, look at such and such companies. This is a great mission statement. I mean, what makes a mission statement a good thing? Or
what I would say, probably the first thing is that it actually reflects what you, as either the person, if you have a personal mission statement, or if you're a business, what you're really all about. I always tell my clients, and even when we're looking at the different data, we want to have a visibility and an understanding of who that competition is, but we don't want to be so focused on the competition that we develop a brand that's exactly like the competition. Because to market it, we want to celebrate that difference, what makes you unique. And I think that's the same thing, if you're working on a personal mission statement for yourself too, what am I really all about? Same thing with a business. What am I all about? What am I on a mission to accomplish? What is my ultimate goal? And then you can build from there.
Okay. Yeah, it's just.
And I think the other thing is it evolves over time too. So even though you might have a mission statement once, it might change.
Okay. And with that, that would go to your business as a whole. Even, there's going to be things that will change where you go, be it the economy, be it just technology, be it whatever that may drive you differently. The businesses are open to those changes, or the ones that succeed.
Yeah.
A la Blockbuster and Netflix. All right, and I know you give this advice to your potential clients also. We'll see if you do it yourself. Creating a SWOT analysis as a manager.
I think that is
what
so
does
important.
that mean, first of all, and why is it important?
So a SWOT analysis it's a marketing term, but it's SOWT, and it's your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And really, I think that when you're thinking about this on the personal side, it's self-awareness. It's knowing who you are, what you're good at, maybe where you want to seek out some outside support, where those different opportunities are for you. Same thing for the business. Understanding, what really is that strength for the brand or the business? Where are some of the areas where the brand could really seek to improve? I always like to think of the opportunity or the weaknesses as opportunities too, because even though it's not a strength right now, it's an opportunity for us to work on it. And then those opportunities are maybe those different pieces that, you've possibly identified them on the weaknesses side of that chart that you're putting together for the business. but where you can make an impact and where you can either play on your strengths, so you can bring your strength into it to further that opportunity for the business, or if it's a weakness, what are different things that I can learn to help the business evolve from there. And then the threat would be kind of any outside factors that could get in the way of achieving those different goals.
Have you ever had to have a come to Jesus moment with a client where they just have this long list of strengths and opportunities and no weaknesses, no threats?
I think a lot of times the feedback that I get from a business owner is, wow, this was really great. I've never actually thought about this for my business before. And kind of that piece, which is always informative and it's always a great experience for them. And I think it's something that but the weakness is sometimes there's a little bit less on the list than there are in the other categories. It's hard for us to see our own weaknesses, but I think that's why having that support, like when we were talking about, collaborating or having a mentor, having someone you can ask for help, having someone that you can help kind of address your blind side too, really can be helpful. Whether you're in school and you're working on a team and you want to learn how to, work and grow, sometimes that manager role can see more for you than you might be able to see for yourself. You're a little too close to it. And it's good to get that outside feedback. I'm actually going through that process with my business right now with the mission statement and those different pieces, because I felt just too close to it. I've rewritten it so many times and it doesn't exist publicly because it never quite feels done. But sometimes we can be too close to it, and getting that outside perspective can help us see that in a different way.
Okay. I like that. And last kind of question, thought area I have is culture of businesses, and more probably your mid-sized to large-sized, businesses. And I know you've dealt with them and worked with some of them. How do you, or tips you have to survive that corporate culture, that the politics of it all, I guess, is the best way to.
This is the hardest question.
That's why I saved it for the end. Wear you down.
I was feeling so good. I was like, man, I got all this. Now I just don't know. I think kind of anytime you're dealing with the public or another individual, it always has the opportunity to be a challenge. And I think in that environment, I've worked in corporate before. I've also worked with corporate. And so you can see kind of that a lot of times, different corporate positions have a reputation of maybe moving a little bit slower. There's sometimes a lot of red tape or challenges or barriers that come into your way, especially as an external consultant. There's so many different areas of approval. I think one of the things that I have learned, and one of the things that I really try to do when I'm working with those clients, is being really clear on what that process is up front, because there's nothing worse than going into it and not knowing what you're doing and then asking the wrong person or not asking enough people. Everyone kind of, making sure that process is really clear and that you understand it. I think that can be really, really helpful from the start. And then I think even thinking back on my times where I worked in a corporate environment, that information, and it's nothing necessarily, it's not going to just be on one piece of paper, but it's something that you also learn over time. But I think not being afraid to ask for that help from your manager or from a team member or a colleague who might be able to help point you in the right direction, especially in corporate. Those environments can be very large and there can be a lot of people. And so it can feel very confusing if you don't necessarily have that guidance, and you might have to seek it out, not being afraid to ask for help. But I think even on kind of with me working with a corporate entity on the client side, is really always coming back to the goals. One of the first things, and I don't know if I specifically mentioned this, but part of that questionnaire is really understanding those business goals and what they want to achieve, and really making sure that everything that I'm recommending or that I'm thinking of has a relation back to that goal. that's something I think for for management too. If you're in that scenario, you can easily get off on a course and, and really help and go a little bit too far, maybe even, or not give enough. But I think when you have those guiding principles, those goals in mind, it can help you navigate all of those different pieces.
That's really good advice. I also look at, like, I mean, within that, when you're working in that corporate culture, especially in the management roles, it takes a very skilled person to be in the lower half of those management roles and put up with the abuse, neglect, disgust, and everything that kind of falls down that hill towards lower, and your ideas get shot down but then taken, and it's a tough world to survive that culture. And also, even like with what you said as a contractor, I think at that first meeting, you've got 3 people there from the company that are, you assume, decision makers of some sort, and you speak to one and move forward with the thing to find out that person isn't the final decider. It's just learning how to navigate that is it's a tough road to hoe, I guess, is the best way to put it, I think.
It absolutely is. Corporate is I think it's a very demanding environment. It's a very challenging environment. It can also be a very rewarding environment. You can learn a lot. There's definitely a lot more opportunity to grow when you're in a larger company because they just have more positions to fill. But there is a lot of different, even jargon, that you have to kind of learn. And it's definitely different than the real world even too. So, and definitely totally different than a small business might operate. There are a lot of different complications on that corporate side that might not necessarily be the same at a smaller organization, but when you're managing thousands of people, you have to have different processes and different pieces in place in order to make it all work. And so that there's kind of, I always think of it as, there are pros and cons to everything, and just figuring out what works for you the best too.
I mean, you're a little bit younger than I am. A lot younger than I am. I don't want to say that, but where do you see, because I mean, I look at this and I think big corporations are at the edge of being like a dinosaur that's going to go extinct. I don't see them, except for some few organizations that have to stay huge just based on what they are. But I don't think businesses are going to grow in the same manner that they grew. I think there's going to be a lot more regional, like the splitting of AT&T. I don't know. I mean, it's just, I don't see the huge corporations being the place where 20 and 30-year-olds want to work. And if there's not the workers, there isn't going to be the corporation. Am I kind of right, totally off?
I mean, it would just be my opinion, but
Well, yeah,
I think that
we're on soapboxes now. We're off the facts and figures.
I think that it definitely, like, I worked in corporate in-house for 92 days. It was, to be really honest with everyone, the longest 92 days of my life. It just wasn't the environment for me. It was just a very challenging environment to be in. And I think, when I was working for corporate, I worked for a team that we had 17,000 employees in the United States and another like 30 or something thousand throughout the world. And it was just, I mean, to make that machine work and grow was one thing. They did a lot of things that I was actually pleased and surprised to see, where, because a lot of times those older, they're more established corporations, they're larger, they're not as flexible to new ideas, new ways of doing things, even just the idea of working from home. I know a couple of corporations, even, that have offices here in the Phoenix metro area where, I mean, COVID really made them force them into the work from home piece, but that mentality of everyone's got to come into the office. We have this office, everyone has to be here. And I mean, when you have a global team, that's not necessarily the same or the same approach, but because it is such a larger system, it is hard to incite change and to do things differently, because I almost picture it as this like big train that's just moving and moving, and it's hard to stop the train because it is so big and it has so much force. I think that's like physics or something, but I don't know. But I do think that we will see, I don't know if we'll see necessarily, I don't know how long, but I do know that it is becoming an environment where younger generations aren't as interested to work because they aren't as flexible. So I think they're either going to have to adapt or die.
Yeah.
That's,
And I think you're right, and we're getting 2:15, so I gotta let him go. But I think you're very right in the aspect of COVID basically forcing them to break that logjam. I think there's a lot of businesses that realized we have a lot of duplication in positions, and we have a lot of office space. We really don't need people sitting in an office all day. And I think that's going to be the first step towards a new corporate normal and management levels and structures, which should be interesting to see what happens. I talked for a bunch with Stephanie. Does anybody have any questions before we let Stephanie go, or comments about the topic or anything?
No, I'm all clear so far. I got no questions.
All right, well, good. Sounds good. Well then, Stephanie, we will thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate you coming online and sharing some of your experiences, and I will talk to you soon, I'm sure.
sounds great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.